Hey, welcome back. This is my explanation of the arcing, I guess, the electrical arcing that you're seeing right now on this Honda Urban Express. And it's the best explanation I can come up with. It may not be 100% accurate or correct. You are free to write down in the comments below what your thoughts are on the matter. But without further ado, let's get into it. So, as you saw when I had the bike running and would hit that rear brake lever, there was electrical arcing. There was sparking there, which was weird. I initially assumed that it had something to do with the rear brake light switch, which is connected to that lever left hand control. I completely disconnected the wiring to the rear brake light switch, and that resulted in zero change. Later, I even completely removed the rear brake light switch and tried it again, resulting in zero change. From there, there's a bundle of wires from the left-hand control that deal with the horn, turn signals, and headlight. I completely unplugged those, resulting in yet again zero change. From there, I disassembled the left-hand controls and visually inspected the inside and the wiring in there, and everything looked good. Be careful disassembling that, especially the headlight switch on top. There's a tiny little spring and a contact piece that will pop out and cause you headaches and nightmares, especially if you lose that spring or that little contact piece. Everything looked fine there, so the next thing I did was disconnected the yellow and white wires from the stator to the bike, which in theory should eliminate all power from the stator going to anywhere on the bike, especially the front of the bike here. Guess what? That resulted in zero change yet again. So finally, after exhausting what I thought were all options, I ended up just disconnecting the rear brake cable entirely from the left-hand control there, the right, what you see there, and just let it hang off the bike, and that resulted in a change. I could no longer start the bike, so I suspected that there was a spark related grounding issue. And normally on Urban Expresses, the ignition coil is connected to the frame in the hollow area there underneath the bike. But the bolt holes for that were all rusty and useless. So I connected the coil here to the engine. That might have been, I think that's part of the problem. And then what I think, you see this connection here, there's a rear brake stop which holds the brake cable against the transmission area so that the brake cable housing does not move as you operate the brake cable. What I think was happening was the engine was seeking, or the ignition coil was seeking ground. Apparently, just grounding it to the engine was not sufficient. Was going through the engine to this connection through the frame, through the brake cable, and back to the handlebars and frame at the other end here. So it was seeking ground because, for whatever reason, now I used a zinc mending brace to attach it to the engine, but I don't think that was the coil to the engine, but I don't think that was the problem. The problem is that normally the ignition coil is attached to the frame and grounds through the frame, because grounding through the engine is not sufficient, at least not sufficient enough. So it found a way to ground to the frame through the rear brake cable. And I took a look at a wiring diagram supplied by Joseph Rich. This is for the Urban Express Deluxe, and it's rather nice. And I have in green, those are all ground wires or grounds. And in the previous picture, what I had circled there was the electric starter motor connection. Those wires had been severed by someone in the past, and I had connected them in that picture. And when I had made that connection, everything worked fine. So now the question is why? So if I've numbered the relevant areas to help you follow along. So if you look at number 4, that is the ground for the electric start motor. That M on that circle there is the electric starter motor, and there's 2 wires coming out of it. One is a green ground wire leading back to the battery at number 5. And the Urban Express Deluxe basically has 2 ground wires which are joined together and connect to the negative terminal of the battery. It also has 2 red positive wires which are joined together and connect to the positive wire of the battery. So if we go from 4, follow the wire up to 5 to the negative terminal on the battery, then there's that number 6 wire going back to the, I'll call it the urban system ground, connecting at number 2. There's a connection there. And then if you follow wire number 7 across, you'll see it connects with number 3, which is the ground to the Urban Express frame. And that connection, I believe, is made, correct me if I'm wrong in the comments below, but that connection, I believe, is made at the regulator rectifier combination assembly underneath the seat, underneath the plastic piece. I believe that is what it's referring to, the frame ground. That's where the Urban is grounded at the frame. So what was happening? What was happening? Remember, the stock Urban ignition coil is connected to the underside of the frame, not the engine as I had done it. And it must be, Honda must have done that for a reason. Because maybe there's enough stuff that's already grounding to the engine that this needs to be grounded to the frame. And as I said before, it found a way through the rear brake cable to ground through the frame. So when I made the starter motor connection, which is the starter motor is grounded to the frame, when I made that connection, you could see if you go from 4 to 5 to 6 to the connection at 2, down 7, and back up to 3, now we have provided a path for what I think was the ignition coil to ground through the frame again. So I think that's what happened. And maybe I should just make it even easier and run a grounding strap from the ignition coil where I have it to the frame. But my explanation is there was a reason that Honda attached the ignition coil directly to the frame underneath the bike, and that was so that the ignition coil could ground through the frame. And that was probably because there were enough things already grounded through the engine that they needed to ground the ignition coil and other things through the frame. There's enough stuff already on there, and adding any more would be too much. So by connecting those wires that have been severed to the electric start motor, now I have provided a pathway where the ignition coil could once again ground through the frame. That's my explanation. Feel free to tell me I'm wrong, why I'm wrong, or feel free to add your explanation below. But that's what I got. So, hey, thanks for watching. We'll catch you soon.